It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to this June 20th, Tuesday edition of the RealAg Radio Show. I am your host, because it's Tuesday, Lyndsey Smith. And today's show is a really good one. I've got a clip from last night's episode of The Agronomists with Johanna, Lindeboom, and Bob Thirlwall, all about emergence issues on soybean and corn. Please check it out. And also, if you want to hear more, head to realagriculture.com /agronomists. You can see the whole episode. Really good one. But we've also got an incredibly important discussion on impending rules that have to do with financial disclosures you may have to submit either to your accountant and maybe even to your bank. And this is especially important if you farm in Western Canada. So we'll dig into that later in the show. And your regular host, Shaun Haney, makes a bit of an appearance at the end of the show where we talk about the ever-important combine prep. Yes, I know it's June, but before you know it, we'll be into the winter wheat, into the winter barley, and having the combine ready is just so very important. Okay, so let's get on with the show. Of course, we love your feedback. You can call that RealAg feedback line 1-855-776-6147, or you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or of course, find us across social media. Let's go to a break, and I'll be back with a clip from The Agronomists right after this.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today. Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by U.S. Borax. Granubor, ask for it by name. All right, we hop into this clip from last night's episode of The Agronomists with Johanna, Lindeboom, and Bob Thirlwall. You'll hear them discussing the emergence issues that much of Ontario experienced this spring, what you can or cannot do about it. There are some success stories, the impact it may have on the growing season, and of course, that all-important replant decision. There is still a bit of time. All right, let's listen. Okay, so yes, we are talking about some challenging conditions this spring. Johanna, why don't you just walk us through sort of, at least for your area, but I think conditions are pretty similar, what that April into May window really looked like and the challenges it set out for growers.
Yeah, so I think probably one of the challenges has been the extremes, right? We went from, a really hot and dry week, and I think it was like early April, late March, to really wet, to warming up, and then, started planting, snapped back to a couple really cold nights. And then we had little bit of rain as a break now, and we're back to hot again. So it's presented some interesting challenges. One of our biggest challenges has been, I've never seen the clay this hard. A lot of people are talking about it from the mild winter, not having as much freeze thaw action in the soil. So not seeing it break up the way we normally would, but that's definitely been a challenge for us. A lot of dry planting conditions. And yeah, it's been an interesting one for sure.
Now, Bob, I thought we wanted dry during planting. Was it too dry?
Yeah, there's a difference between dry and super dry. Never seen before dry. So absolutely, we would rather, what's the saying? Plant into dust and the bins will bust. So it is nice to get, corn and soybeans in the ground, get their roots established, driving down deep and helping, being able to collect some moisture later on in the season if it does get dry. So typically dry in the spring is nice, but I would just echo some of the things Johanna mentioned. We had what I describe as Caribbean weather in the week of April 12th or 14th, in that range. And then we went backwards, and there was a tiny bit of crop put in April in that hot week. And then really most of the guys west of London really didn't get going until I think it was the 8th of May.
Yeah.
And so those guys that got started early had a pretty good start. But like Johanna mentioned, the clay, I've never seen it so hard either. And, we had the driest May on record, I think, in the last 50 years. And one rain in May, guys started planting and finished planting corn and soybeans without getting their planter wet. It's just unheard of.
Yeah.
The clay was really, really hard. There was less frost this year. We also had a couple of big, heavy rain events in March and April that I think really pounded that clay and made it hard.
Yeah. So I guess that's my one question. Johanna, did you see any evidence of sort of early work or last fall work that spelt perhaps worse conditions this spring? I mean, we all love a crystal ball to know what we'll be up against, but or was it the other way around? We were sort of waiting around to get stuff done, but were there any sort of sins of going in too early in those earlier windows because we didn't have that terrible winter or long winter?
I don't think there's a lot of errors last fall that we saw, but any kind of spring tillage this year was really, really difficult to try and get a seed bed out of it. What would normally take guys 2 passes took 3 or 4 in some cases. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but some of our cover crops were some of the hardest ground to deal with, I think, just because it pulled a lot of moisture out early. Yeah.
Well, for sure, if anyone's got any questions or comments on that one, do throw them in there, because that certainly has been a hot topic lately in these last few weeks, is trying to figure out, what some of the fallout might be from some of these big water-using crops potentially. But let's get into some of the specifics of what we've seen. So, Bob, maybe I'll start with you. We do have some great visuals as well, but Bob, what has been perhaps one of the most common emergence issues that you've seen either for soy or corn?
Yeah, I'll start with soybeans. That was really the crop that really struggled for us across most of Ontario. And the corn seemed to get off to a good start. Even guys planted corn and soybeans the same day into similar conditions across the road kind of thing. And the corn seemed to have enough moisture to get started. And the soybeans really struggled. And by no fault of their own, a lot of growers planted deeper than they normally would this year. And I think at the time it was the right thing to do. We were chasing moisture, and we were all planting, 2.5 inches on the clay, whether it was no-till or whether it was worked ground that had dried out a little bit. And I think, again, doing the right thing, chasing moisture, we always like to get that seed into moisture. But then we got a little rain the 19th of May. Most of our area in the southwest got about a 1/2 inch. Some areas got 1 inch. And then the following week, we had 2 nights of frost. So it rained on Friday night, We had 2 nights of frost, Wednesday and Thursday night following. And I think those 2 combinations really set up the seed trench so hard. And we even had guys that, had no-tilled in, had a nice crumble on top of the seed trench. Wasn't really a heavy crust that we're normally used to with a bit of rain on the clay. But the seed trench was so tight, it was just holding those plants in there, and it was really, really tough to get those through. And so soybeans were definitely our biggest trouble this year. And then in some areas, guys would set up their drill to plant 2 to 2.5 inches in the hardest parts of the field, and they'd have their down pressure set for that. And then in the softer soil areas of the field, we'd get down to 3 inches. Well, soybeans have a really tough time coming from 3 inches. I don't like 3 inches personally. I think 2.5 is kind of the max. But again, that's just the way conditions went. And those beans that were in 3 inches just ran out of gas. They did. Yeah.
Yeah. So Johanna, similar story for beans in your area as well?
Yeah, I kind of echo those comments. I do think in most cases where we were able to plant to moisture at 2.5 inches deep, we did okay with that. For the most part, like that May 19th, May 20th rain is what marked a lot of our, for sure, replants. Like stuff planted before that rain had a lot of issues versus stuff planted the day after the rain is some of the best that we've seen. One of my customers told me if he had it his way, he would have planted everything on May 21st. But unfortunately, we don't have big enough planters for that. So,
Right.
Definitely echo a lot of Bob's comments there.
But also, we're also told we're supposed to go in early. So I totally get where, you've got acres to cover. You've got a calendar that you don't know what's going to come a week after. So, yeah. So again, being able to look back and say, should have waited to the 21st. If you knew you were going to have great conditions at the 21st, you'd wait, but we don't know. So it happens. Okay. I do want to, Johanna, maybe you can pick which slide it is. But looking at some of these soybeans that certainly got, either some of that cold injury or just crusting or just couldn't get out of the ground. Which slide is it? I think I wrote it down, but maybe you can check.
Slide 2 we can start with.
Start there.
Just to echo on your comment there about not knowing the future, I think talking to a lot of growers, there wasn't too many people happy with the planting conditions they were planting into on the clay, trying all sorts of things to work it out. And yeah, I don't think we can fault anybody for not wanting to park their planter, in the second week of May during spring, right? And some of the fields made it up and they're okay. Like Bob said, like most of our corn we're pretty happy with. So, so these cold nights, the one thing that really struck me, yes, we do have some heavy clay, but we have some really nice sandy loam as well. And the first corn I was looking at was on some of the best ground in my territory. And that's where this leafing out underground picture in the top left comes from. And there was no crust on it, right? So it looks exactly like it got crusted. But seeing a lot of this, and the corn stand was pretty good. Like we still had probably 30,000 plants, but you could tell there was obvious skips. And that's what really struck it for me. Like that was one of my first days digging up populations. I thought it looks like we actually did get some injury from this cold. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, one of those beans, it looks like it almost came up to the surface and then it sort of spiraled back down. To me, that's a sign of, probably some cold injury instead of crusting. And we saw a couple weird ones like that. Or some that looked like they had a crust, but there was really no crust on top. And it was that tight seed trench that Bob was talking about.
I feel like this is like, nope. It's like going up. Nope. Going back down. Not doing this. Yeah, those are the nopes. Okay, so Bob, when you see something like the corn leafing out underground, but as Johanna said, no crust. So that's cold injury. Is that a common symptom that you would see in cold injury?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We saw too, I think. I think it just really took the vigor out of the soybeans particularly. But when you see that with corn, for sure. It's coming up. It maybe meets a little bit of resistance. It doesn't have to be a heavy crust, but then that cold shock, and it'll just the corn plants that maybe have a little less vigor than other ones, we'll just turn around and try to leaf out and no go.
They're trying, guys. They're trying.
They're doing their best.
They're doing their best. All right. Jason Vogt out of Manitoba shares that chasing moisture in the clay in south central Manitoba for soybeans was the right thing to do. This year, using air quotes though, most plants emerged evenly. Others have soybeans that are anywhere from emerging to V3, V4. So a lot of variability there. But again, the quotes in this year, because exactly that, you don't always know if going deeper to moisture is the right call. And it does also matter what happens thereafter, right? That what happens after that seed goes in the ground in those next few days can make or break that decision as well. So, so definitely interesting to see. Okay. So we've got definitely some cold injury. As Johanna, you use the terrible term, the replant term. So we do want to tackle a little bit of that tonight. Making that call for replants, what is that minimum plant stand that you absolutely have to have? Johanna, you've walked some of these fields. You just joined us on a school episode on this very topic. How do you make the call on the replants?
Yeah, so to give you an idea, like we were being really patient with the rains we had last week. I did the math real quick. I think I got probably 1,100 acres to walk with some serious replant concerns in phone calls today alone. So it definitely is out there. Normally you'd say minimum 100,000 plants per acre. On some of the clays, we'd like to see 120 to 140, but this late in the year, we're going to put up with 100, 110,000 if they're healthy plants. And that's a big consideration is, are all the plants that are up, are they healthy? Are they looking good? Or are they sort of half dead already? I think having this rain over the last week was, one of my coworkers would call it $1 million rain because it saved a lot of crops for us. And I think just the way the top of the soil stayed moist, the beans were able to push up and seeing a lot more promising fields right now.
So Bob, same idea when you're getting calls like Johanna's getting and you're walking fields that, are on that cusp. We are, June 19th, we're getting through June here. What goes into a decision like that right now, this late in the year?
Well, Johanna covered it pretty well. The other thing I would just add is how consistent the stand is across, because you can get lots of stands that are maybe in that 120 to 140, but then you'll get gaps that maybe 60 or 80, depending where water laid or just a harder part of the soil, maybe a clay knoll, those kinds of things. And so we always try to figure out, okay, is it a big enough patch worthwhile bringing the planter out to this field for? Maybe just a little tiny piece in the corner that you would ignore. But most often, it's just patchy throughout the field because, different elevation, a clay knoll. It could be a low hard spot where water laid that would be harder, and couldn't get the beans down into moisture. We also saw a lot of soybeans that just sat dry in dry dirt, just like they were in the bag the day you brought them home from the dealer. And so these recent rains have started those soybeans to germinate. And a lot of those have popped through in 6 or 7 or 8 days. But some of them I've noticed the last couple of days looking are just struggling as well. I'm not sure all of those are going to make it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and I will be back with Garner Deobald with the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association to talk about this financial disclosure statement that is potentially coming to Canada as early as this summer.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on realagriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, realagriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now for a very important but perhaps frustrating conversation is Garner Deobald. He's the president of the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association. Welcome here, Garner. All right, so one of the reasons that we're having this conversation is about the potential of new sustainability financial disclosure standards coming to Canada. And if anyone was sort of following along last week over social media, this issue popped up, and there were, I got to say, far more questions than anybody had answers for as to what this even is and what it could mean, and that is super concerning. So, Garner, catch us up on, from the stock growers' perspective, what's the concern and what is this even all about?
For sure. I will, try to rough out what our understanding is of and what our concerns are here, I guess, as far as these standards here that are being rushed into use here in Canada. And again, it's something that started out, the International Sustainability Standards Board is something that has been operating for a while. And recently, a year ago here, Canada followed through here as well with a Canadian Sustainability Standards Board, and so they are coming with some recommendations here again that will have a huge impact on agriculture for sure. It will impact the economics of it. It's gonna increase cost of production in many ways, and I'll try to outline some of that, I guess, as we go through this. And it's very difficult to understand, and we do have a lot of concerns about it. A lot of it is because it's been rushed through and will be implemented here this summer by the sounds of it. So, again, without any public consultation, and that's what we're asking for is just to have the opportunity, I guess, to try to understand this a little bit better and get people that will comment on it. And again, this is being brought forward here by a group that's not elected and not accountable to anybody. And our people, federally and provincial to a certain degree as well, need to take a stand on this. And again, because of the negative impact it'll have on our economy and negative impact it will have on, just food production and then ultimately the cost of food. It's going to increase because of this. And so we do have a lot of concern over this.
So, okay. And this is the part where we're trying to dig into what this even is or means. So when we talk about sustainability and we talk about standards or those sorts of things, we're usually talking about, production. We're usually talking about record keeping or how you manage land, though that kind of sustainability. What we're talking about here, though, this is all on the financial side. And I'm having a really hard time understanding what exactly would potentially corporations or companies be reporting. So, and I'm going to assume to CRA or those sorts of things. What kind of information are they looking for that links up to sustainability?
Right, and so that is it. Like they are linking this all to a financial, the economics of it, I guess. But in the end, what it is, it's greenhouse gas reporting upstream and also downstream. And also the reporting of that. And so it is a system that will be set up more or less social credit scoring. And so if you're a huge emitter, there will be a cost to that. And there again, too, in simple terms, it would be an increased cost, or possibly that you may have a financial institution that may not even want to do business with you if you are a huge emitter. And so the cost there again of capital and the cost operation will increase dramatically in those cases. So again, because of this, there's a huge cost to the reporting side of it. Again, it'll have to be third-party verified. So again, accounting side and just the record-keeping side, there's a huge cost to that as well. So, when you look at that, and again, I don't begin to understand it entirely, but those are the concerns that we have, is that it will just increase the cost of doing business and have a huge impact on small business and especially on agriculture. So, those are the things that we're looking at. And there, like you had said earlier, there's more questions probably than what we have answers for, but, that's why we're calling for or asking that there is some, that we are consulted on it and have that opportunity. And many times in agriculture, one of the biggest problems is like they want to measure everything as gross emitters, and on the agriculture side, net emissions would be more appropriate. It would be something that we would get some credit for. The good work that we've done, whether that is on the grain side or on the livestock side, that we sequester carbon and rarely get any credit for it. So that's where, rather than gross emissions, let's look at net emissions, and, that would be part of the conversation anyway.
And that is, so let's touch on that then. Certainly the Saskatchewan Stock Growers circulated the letter that you did send to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau. Have you had a response on that? I know it hasn't been that many days, but have you heard anything directly from the ministry or from the government in general on the possibility of having any sort of public consultation?
Well, their response, we did get a quick informal brief response from them that they're not experts on this and really had no suggestion of what they would do or could do, and really were not it didn't sound like they were prepared to stand up for the producers side of it for sure, or for agriculture in general. It was something that it just sounded like that they would let this process go ahead and that they had no influence on an independent party like this. And so again, rather than saying that they would stand up for agriculture and for producers or for Canadian consumers in general, they've more or less just shrugged and said there really isn't anything that they could do about it. And that's incorrect. I mean, it definitely could initiate some, a way that we could sit down and have a discussion on this and just see where they wanted to go with it and look at the impact that it may have on the economy and just to make sure that we're not rushing this through and rushing into something here that's going to have a real negative impact on the economy.
Okay, thank you, Garner, for that conversation. There is so much more to this, and so stick around with me after the break. I've got Dr. Tammy Nemeth joining me to further explain where these standards are coming from, how they may be implemented, and, well, to echo Garner's point, why we need a public consultation on how Canada plans to implement these rules. We'll be back right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now on the line is Dr. Tammy Nemeth with ESG Squared Insight. Tammy, we're talking about sustainability and climate-related financial disclosure, and it's a mouthful, and it's also a brainful. So we heard earlier this week from Garner Deobald with the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association, and he, of course, from a producer perspective, is quite concerned about what these disclosures may mean for business and especially for ranchers and farmers in Canada. So can you please talk to me like I'm five? Because I'm trying to figure out what these disclosures are, who is responsible for them, and what impact they may have.
Those are really good terms to try and understand this. So about a year ago, the International Sustainability Standards Board was created, and its job was to develop these standards, and which I always refer to it as ESG on steroids. So there's a proposed 5 sets of these standards, and these are the first 2 being released on Monday, June 26th. So around the same time that this international board was set up, Canada created the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board to work in lockstep. So these standards are meant to quantify all the emissions and all the sustainability things entities are doing. And it's meant to be used by banks, investors, and insurers. So they're going to be told, if this is mandated, they're going to have to provide this information. So they're going to go to their clients and say, I need you to provide all of this information. So when they established these draft standards last year, when they drafted them, they also had an appendix for 68 different industries. So it's agriculture is going to be hit really hard, livestock producers, oil and gas companies, but it's meant to be applied to everybody. The Canadian companies and groups submitted 90 comment letters to this process last year. Over half of them, because I've gone through them all, were critical of certain aspects of these standards, but none of the criticisms were taken into account. So the new Canadian board said in April, the new chair, Charles-Antoine Saint-Jean, that he would like to open up consultations with Canadian stakeholders once these standards were finalized and released, which is Monday, June 26th, and then to figure out if they want to adopt these for Canada or if there's certain changes that might be made to take into account unique Canadian circumstances.
Okay, wonderful explanation. Sort of catches us up, except for it still, to me, begs the question. So these are going to be released, and we are not necessarily looking down at an implementation date per se, but do we have a set sort of consultation process or period where, as an industry, as the 68 industries, as you note, could weigh in on how this may impact their business and how we may implement this?
That's a good question. So basically, if countries decide, because a country has to decide they want to accept these standards. If a country decides they want to accept them, the implementation is fiscal year 2024. That's next year. Mm-hmm. There is no specific process for consultation by the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board. All the new chair said was he would like to open up consultations. It's unclear how they would do that, and most people don't even know. And what I found interesting was that I don't even know if the federal departments know and how many elected representatives know this is coming. Some of the accountants seem to know. Some of the securities people in the provinces seem to know. But there's been this massive lack of communication on what these things are, who they're going to affect, how they're going to be implemented. And, you know, there were lots of criticisms, and none of them were taken into account when they were deliberating the drafts. I watched all of the videos of the ISSP talking about the different things, and none of the criticisms were really acknowledged beyond, oh, there were some people who were upset, but these other people liked it, so we'll go with that.
So, and I'm a rather practical person. I'm also a livestock producer, so this very much, potentially applies to me. I'm still trying to wrap my head around, what am I disclosing? Is it just, what I paid in fuel? Is it what I bought in feed? Like, what on earth would I be reporting to my bank that they are accounting for?
Okay, so this is where it gets really complicated, because one of the things that the board really wanted to include was all of the emissions. So scope 1 is the things you're using directly on your farm, right? So the fuel in your truck, the emissions of your livestock, maybe anything that's in your operation that you know of, you can track directly. That's scope 1. Scope 2 is the emissions in the energy that you're getting from your utility. So, for example, if you're in Ontario, you're getting it from Ontario Power or whatever. In Saskatchewan, it's Sask Power or whatever. But you would get the emissions numbers from them for the electricity, or if you're using natural gas, whatever's using to heat your farm. So you would get that information from your utility. But scope 3 is everything else. So as a livestock producer, there's 15 different categories, and they said they're mandating all 15 categories of scope 3 emissions. Basically, everything anyone does must be accounted for. So you'd have to estimate, because you'd have to be taking into account the indirect emissions. So if you're a livestock producer, you'd have to account for the emissions of your everyday operations, but also for the feed you've purchased. If you've purchased hay or feed, the emissions involved in that. Emissions embedded in everything on your farm. After you've sold your livestock, you'd have to account for the emissions in processing it, transporting the finished product, packaging the product, refrigerating it at the store, the emissions involved with the consumer taking that product home, the refrigeration of that product, the disposal of the packaging, and the emissions involved in preparing and cooking that product. All of it. You'd have to estimate it. Now, the thing is, how are you going to estimate that? Well, they'll come up with some charts that you can maybe draw on to include that in your estimates. But you also have to get third-party verification. So then you're going to have to pay an accountant to audit and make sure that the information you're providing is accurate. Because since it's a financial disclosure, you're liable for any information you put on those forms. So you better, how are you going to estimate all that stuff accurately?
Well, yes. Okay, so first of all, yes. First of all, where do you even begin? How do you even estimate? Where's the list of all of those things, for sure. But also, how are we not? So I think about on like the carbon credit side or the a carbon offset side, we cannot double count. How do we make sure we're not double counting emissions? Because if I'm supposed to estimate the processing and all the way through to, packaging and cooking, what about the processor? Does the processor not have to account for all of its scope 1, 2, and 3? So are we not then creating a quagmire of double counting of emissions? And I guess after that, if you can offer insight into that, to what end? Like, to me, any of these standards or, or carbon taxes or any of these things, they're supposed to drive a change in behavior. So I'm not sure how double counting emissions and creating an absolute administrative nightmare is going to really change how I farm.
You're absolutely right. And that is one of the key issues. I think you've really hit on it. What exactly are they trying to achieve? Because if you're doing all of this stuff, what's the ultimate goal if everybody is double counting, triple counting? Because that's what it'll be. Mm-hmm. If everybody has to account everything in scope 3, everyone's counting it over and over and over and over again. And so what behaviors are they trying to change? Well, if you're producing anything, you're penalized for it. Mm-hmm. So are they trying to say, don't produce anything? So if you sit around in an apartment and huddle around, I don't know, happy dreams, then that's okay, because you're not emitting very much. So it really is a disincentive for producing anything.
Well, and the flip side to this, I guess, is when I think about all the things that I already, when I file my farm statements, when I file with my accountant, a lot of these things are already there in cash value. So if we're going to go through the process of estimating, carbon emissions of all sorts of things, and we're going to be using coefficients or estimates anyway, why would we not just be using what we already file? And if someone really wants to know about the potential emissions impact, why not just use those and create a coefficient based on costs?
That's a really good point. I think what the intent is that every country will have the same data. And so, therefore, it's easier to keep track of what countries are accomplishing with respect to their Paris Agreement commitments. And so if everyone's reporting the same stuff, then they can keep better track of what countries are doing, if they're meeting their obligations or stated obligations or whatever. But it ultimately comes down to the devil being in the details. Because as you point out, you already provide a lot of this information. So why not just stick with what you've got if banks are happy with that? And it's unfortunate that it's going in this direction, that it will be so onerous. My understanding in the European Union, for example, they're doing something similar, and they're phasing it in. So the first year is companies that are really huge have to do this. And then they're going to drag along all of their supply chain with them. And after 5 years, it'll be phased in year after year until it's every individual doing it. I don't know if Canada is thinking about it in the same way, but there's room to adopt the Canadian way to what the global standard is requiring. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's important, is to have that conversation, because there's been no conversation. We're throwing this out there for comment. Hardly anybody knew it was happening except for really big corporations and financial institutions and so on. But the people who it's really going to affect are the smaller producers, the medium-sized companies, the little shop on the corner that's going to have to account for how many free-range eggs they have in their store and so on. So, I mean, we need to have this conversation before it's implemented, not after. And that's why I've been trying to sort of explain to people that this is coming, and to take Charles Antoine St. Jean at his word that he would open up consultations so that we can have this national conversation.
So we heard from the stock growers that, they had approached Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and said, we need this consultation, and the response that they got essentially was, not our department. So who, I guess this is perhaps my last question as we run out of time here, but who oversees a standard body like this that could essentially tell them, yes, you will have a consultation, and here's the format for it?
That's a good question. I've been trying to figure that out, because there seems to be layers of different boards and groups that are responsible for these things. So the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board is under the Department of Finance ultimately. And there is also the FRAS Canada, which is the financial regulators. So they're the ones, the Financial Reporting and Assurance Standards Canada body, independent body, houses the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board there. There aren't individual, you can't contact the individual board members except on LinkedIn, which is interesting. But there is somebody at FRAS Canada who's the vice president overseeing the sustainability stuff, and people can contact her. I would also recommend to contact your MP and say, do you know about this? Why aren't we having a conversation? Are we not, is this not a democracy? And don't citizens get a say before these things get put into place? And why not? And shouldn't they be saying something about that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Dr. Nemeth, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This is infuriating, but incredibly eye-opening. So that's good.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We're going to talk equipment and making sure that we're ready for harvest, which I say sadly is right around the corner. It just feels like this year is just, whooshing by. We got to be ready for harvest when it does come. Right now, we're talking to Jim Franceschetti. He's a product marketing manager with Parts and Service at Case IH. Jim, great to chat with you.
Happy to be here, Shaun. Thanks.
Okay, Jim, when we talk about being ready for harvest and having our combines or combine ready, what are some of the things we need to make sure that we're doing from your perspective with the manufacturer?
Sure. First, of course, is bringing it out of storage, making sure that you're doing kind of that once over, top to bottom, from front to back inspection yourself. Just starting it up. Taking a look at everything. You never know what can happen in storage, right? There's always the possibility or opportunity for rodent infestation or hydraulic lines freezing or a leak happening. So really just making sure that when you bring it out of storage, you're taking a good look at it yourself. And next, I would say, good opportunity to open up that operator's manual and follow the steps within there. It contains everything that you need to do and pay attention to when you bring that combine out of storage. And usually starting with all your fluids and your lubricants, making sure that everything is topped off and ready from that perspective, and then really diving into the specific functions of the combine. So again, kind of doing that front to back, top to bottom inspection.
Yeah, you had sent me a note talking about the 5 W's of combine inspection. So there's W's when it comes to a topic. So what specifically to combine inspection? What are the 5 W's?
The who, what, where, when, and why. Okay, so certainly the who is any owner or operator of Case IH combines. What we're talking about again is that preseason combine inspection and readiness. Really just, again, making sure that you're addressing things ahead of the season. I always like to say it's never too early to start taking a look at that piece of machinery and getting yourself prepared. And also, I think, thinking back of last year's harvest, how did it go? Was there anything that you forgot to address when you put it up for storage that you need to handle now? And kind of, put yourself in that mind frame to think about how things went last season, and if there's anything you need to do right out of the gate in preparation for the upcoming harvest. And certainly, where can this be done? I'm going to encourage every operator to have a good relationship with their local Case IH dealer. They are certainly the experts. They are going to offer combine clinics throughout the months leading up to harvest. They have and see a lot of combines, right? They certainly are the experts and can provide you with all that information. If you're doing the inspection yourself, or if you'd like, of course, you can bring that combine into the dealership and have them do, about 190-point inspection and really go through the machine, thoroughly to make sure that you're set up to go. As far as the when, it's never too early. As I already said, it's important to be thinking about harvest as soon as you're done planting. I'd say you want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible. And why you want to do this? Well, it's pretty simple, right? We want to reduce the downtime or the potential for downtime when harvest actually starts. and to ensure that we're maximizing our efficiency. You know, these combines are built with a lot of precision, a lot of technology. We want to make sure that operators are utilizing as much as they can to be effective and to get as much grain in the tank as possible.
So you mentioned combine clinics. We hear a lot about planter clinics and, you know, people making sure that because we're only doing these activities once a year, right? And if weather cooperates, it happens over a relatively short period of time. What's the benefit and what am I getting out of a combine clinic if I'm thinking about attending one that my dealer's putting on?
Yeah, Case IH dealerships do a wonderful job with their combine clinics. They are going to have the experts in-house to talk to operators and producers directly. So not only the dealership's service department, their parts counter people, but oftentimes people, product specialists from Case IH will attend the clinic and be able to share tips and tricks and enhancements and potential upgrades that the operator could utilize, just to, again, make themselves more effective for the upcoming season. And I think additionally, in something that's probably often overlooked or maybe not considered, is the information you'll learn from your peers, right? From your colleagues, your other farmers and producers in the area that are attending the clinics, an opportunity to hear what questions they're asking. Maybe they have certain tips or tricks, for that area, given the field conditions or crop conditions specific to that area. It's a good opportunity for them to learn from each other, as well as all the experts that the dealership is likely to have on hand.
Yeah, and across all the different colors and brands of combines, everybody's done a lot of work in the area of assisting with, we would probably say AI now when it comes to combine setting, especially like on the go and adjusting to some of the conditions. But there also is a human element there where we can really learn from some of our peers, as you did mention, because just minimizing the good grain that is being thrown over. Just reducing that a little bit at the end of the day really adds up.
Totally agree, Shaun. And that's a very important point. And you hit or you mentioned on the technology and the precision and all the calibration that can be done. There's a good chance, certainly someone from the dealership, they'll have, precision farming experts, but even your peers, might utilize some of those features a little bit better than you currently do, so you'll be able to learn from them and maybe something that you're able to apply to your operation.
All right. And with that, we are done another show on this Tuesday. Thank you for joining me so much. Of course, I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, on Tuesdays for the next little while. You can find me on social media at RealLoudLyndsey. You can, of course, zip us an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or find us on social media at RealAgriculture. We've got a Real Ag feedback line as well, 1-855-776-6147. Would love to hear what you think of today's show, or any show, quite frankly. Your host, Shaun Haney, will be back tomorrow. It's Wednesday. For sure, there'll be some market talk. We also heard some news today out of Health Canada and PMRA about maximum residue limits and perhaps an extension of a pesticide ban on a cosmetic pesticide ban on federal land. So we'll be looking into that and get you all that news likely on tomorrow's show. Really appreciate everyone taking the time today to join me. Big thanks, of course, to my guests on the Agronomists as well, Johanna, Lindeboom, and Bob Thirlwall. Thank you to Garner Deobald, to Tammy, Nemeth, and to Shaun for joining us for our last segment as well. Okay, I will be back on Friday for the Real Ag Issues panel. Until then, have a safe week.